Do you believe love can be a sin? That someone can look at you, see tenderness in your eyes, and still say there's a demon inside you? I did. Or at least, I was taught to believe. Since I was little, they said God saw everything, but they never told me he saw with such anger. And that's what I want to tell you about the day they tried to cure me, not of an illness, but of who I was. About the church where they told me the love I felt had to die for my soul to live. At that time, I was 21 years old. I still believed in miracles, in prayers, in promises of salvation. I believed in everything, except myself. I tried to be good. I tried to please God, my parents, my neighbors, my pastors, the whole world. But inside there was a secret I carried like a cross. I liked men. And that to them was the worst kind of sin. The sin that is not confessed, the one that is erased. The first time I realized something was wrong was when my mother called me in to talk after the service. She was shaking. She said the pastor had felt something in the spirit, that I needed help, that they'd been praying for me for weeks. And before I could say anything, she hugged me and cried as if I'd died. I tried to ask what was wrong, but she just kept saying, "It's going to be for your own good, my son. It's what God wants." 2 days later, I woke to the sound of a car honking outside. It was Brother Elias, one of the church leaders, tall, with a Bible always tucked under his arm, and the look in his eyes of someone who never doubts his own power. He told me to come in. "Let's begin the process of liberation," he said, as if he were taking me to a doctor's appointment. I obeyed. I always have. Fear has that power. It can make you confuse faith with submission. The drive was silent. The radio was off, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, the sound of the tires screeching along the road. I looked out the window and saw the trees rushing past, as if warning me to flee. When the car stopped, we were in front of an old building with white walls and shuttered windows. Out front, a sign, Ministry of Healing and Deliverance. The beautiful name hid a hell. I was greeted by a woman in a long dress and a cold smile. "Welcome, dear," she said. "Here you will be reborn." She led me to a small room with an iron bed, a cross nailed to the wall, and a single window covered by heavy curtains. "Here you will pray, fast, and purify yourself. The Lord will remove from you everything that does not come from him." That night, the sound of footsteps in the hallway kept me from sleeping. I heard screams, not of physical pain but of desperation, voices begging for forgiveness, prayers mixed with cries. Someone called for their mother, another begged to leave. I closed my eyes and tried to pray too, but the words wouldn't come. I felt a knot in my chest, as if something was warning me that what they were calling healing was, in fact, a way to erase who I was. The next morning, 3 people entered the room. The pastor, the woman from before, and another younger man carrying a jug of water. They asked me to kneel. The pastor placed his hand on my head and began to pray aloud. "Lord, free this son of yours from the seed of evil. Remove from him this impure spirit that deceives him." With each sentence, his voice rose in pitch. I felt his hands heavy on me, my body trembling, and a heat that didn't come from the Holy Spirit. It came from shame. "I need to confess," the woman shouted. "Tell me what the devil made you feel." I remained silent until the pastor slapped me on the back of the head. "Confess." I loved a man," I said weakly. The pastor shouted louder, as if I had spoken blasphemy. "Love God, not the flesh." And then began what they called liberation. They made me repeat phrases that denied everything I was. They told me to say I was sick, that what I felt was dirty, that the devil was using me to shame the house of the Lord. I repeated them, because pain is persuasive. Because deep down, when everyone tells you you're wrong, a part of you starts to believe it. It was like that for days. The same room, the same prayers, the same screams. They called it a spiritual retreat. I called it prison. They took away my cell phone, my clothes, even the mirror. "The mirror is vanity," they said. But the truth is, they were afraid I'd look at myself and see a human being, not a sinner. One morning I woke to soft music coming from the hallway. Someone was singing a hymn, but the voice was different, soft, human. Through the crack in the door, I saw the boy with the jug, the same one who had given me water that first day. He looked at me with pity, or maybe with something more. "Don't say anything," he whispered. "I'm just bringing bread." I accepted, and for a moment, that piece of bread seemed more sacred than all the prayers I heard inside. It was at that moment that something began to change. For the first time in days, someone looked at me without judgment. It was like a ray of light entering a dark room. And I realized that even surrounded by faith, no one there spoke of love. They spoke of sin, guilt, punishment, but never of love. But never. With each passing day, the line between God and fear grew more blurred. I tried to remember my mother's voice, my friends' laughter, the smell of the street. But everything seemed distant. Even the sound of the church bells gave me chills. I felt small, dirty, and at the same time indignant, because I knew what I felt wasn't malice. It was love, and love shouldn't hurt. At the end of the first week, the pastor came in with a notebook and told me to write down the names of all the men I'd ever felt impure desires for. I looked at him, and inside, I started laughing, because I realized he'd never understand. That it wasn't about names, it was about feeling, about existing. But even there, afraid and ashamed, something inside me didn't break. A part of me still resisted, still believed that God couldn't want that for anyone. And it was that part that kept me alive. And it was there, in that locked room, that the story you're about to hear truly began. Because what they did to me in that church was just the beginning of the hell they called salvation. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something deep inside you. Maybe a memory, maybe a wound, maybe just a desire to understand what so many people go through in silence. And that's exactly why I want to ask you something. This video isn't just a story, it's a muffled cry from someone who was once silenced. So before continuing, if this content touched you in any way, leave your comment. Like this shows YouTube that stories like this need be heard. And if you're not yet registered, sign up now. Here we talk about what the world tries to hide: pain, love, faith, and courage. Each story is an open wound, but also an attempt at healing. And your gesture, however small it may seem, helps this voice reach those who still feel alone. Oh, and tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced something that made you doubt yourself because of your faith or other people? Write, "I know what it's like to be judged for existing." These words help create a current of strength, a reminder that none of us need to hide to be worthy of love. Now yes, let's continue, because what happened next was even deeper, more cruel, and, in a way, the beginning of my liberation. I still remember the smell of old wood mixed with incense, the sound of voices praying in unison, the candles trembling in the wind that filtered through the cracks, and the rough touch of the pastor's hand holding mine. It was the same man who, weeks before, had promised to help me be pure again. Back then I believed everything he said. I believed the problem was within me, that something inside me was dirty, wrong, sick. I was young, scared, and fear made me confuse faith with guilt. It all started when my mother found out. It wasn't a scream or a fight. It was a heavy silence, the kind that makes the air hurt. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You're going to church. They'll help you." The word help sounded nice, but I didn't know I was being handed over to a promise of salvation that, deep down, was a sentence. The following Sunday, she took me to that temple that looked more like a barracks. The walls were too white, the lights too bright, and the people's gaze judged without needing to say anything. The pastor welcomed me with a fake smile and a lingering touch on the shoulder. "Evil cannot survive here. God will free you," he said. And I, with a heavy heart, wanted to believe. At first it all seemed strange. They would call me to special prayer sessions that took place at night after the regular service, always with the lights off, always with a small group, only men, always the same ones. I remember the sound of the doors locking, the pastor's voice telling me to close my eyes and ask forgiveness for what I felt. I didn't know what it meant to ask forgiveness for loving. I only knew that if I said I wanted to change, they would let me breathe. But what began as prayer turned into something else. They said the devil lived inside me, and that to expel him, I needed to feel the shame leave my body. They made me kneel on the cold floor, holding a wooden cross for hours. They prayed loudly, surrounded me, shouted, spitting words that felt like daggers. "Come out of him! You do not belong to the darkness. Purify, Lord." I was trembling. I didn't know if from fear or shame. At some point they asked me to take off my shirt. They said the body was the prison of sin. They touched my shoulders, my chest, my forehead. "Here lies evil," they said, and their touch, which should have been spiritual, began to be something else, a touch that burned, that humiliated. I wanted to run away, but the door was locked. One of the longest nights of my life was the one they left me there, alone in the dark. They told me I would only leave when I felt the Holy Spirit take over. I cried, screamed, banged on the door. No one came. I remember the sound of my own sobs echoing through the room. I remember the fear of going mad, and in the midst of that despair I remember something even more confusing, the sensation of my body reacting, even without wanting to. The touch, the fear, the heat, all mixed together. And that's when I realized how much they were playing with our minds. They wanted to destroy me from the inside so they could later claim to be saving me. When they finally opened the door, the pastor entered with another man, tall in a dark suit, clean-shaven. "This is Brother Elias," the pastor said. "He was like you, but God delivered him. He will help you." Elias smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pity. It was a smile that hid something else, something I recognized immediately: desire. In the following weeks, Elias began attending the sessions, always too close. He offered to pray with me privately, saying he understood what I was feeling, and in a moment of weakness, I accepted. I thought he might be proof that the church truly heals. But what happened in that room was anything but divine. He locked the door, telling me to take off my shirt as part of the process. The air was heavy, and his words were too gentle for a man of faith. "God understands temptations, my son," he whispered. And before I could react, he touched me. I froze. Part of me wanted to scream, part wanted to run away, but fear, the fear of being cast out, of being called unclean, paralyzed me. When it was over, he told me not to tell anyone, that it was part of the healing, that the Holy Spirit worked in mysterious ways. I left that room ashamed of my body, angry with myself, and with one certainty: God wasn't there. But the worst was yet to come. The following Sunday, the pastor called me in front of everyone. He said I was in deliverance and that with faith the demon would leave for good. People applauded, some wept, thinking it was a miracle. I stood there, head bowed, feeling my face burn. Elijah was in the background, smiling. That night, I decided to run away. I couldn't do it anymore. I grabbed what little I had, left a letter for my mother, and left without looking back. The path was dark, but for the first time in a long time I felt the air rushing into my chest without guilt. I know many people may be listening to this right now and thinking, "But why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you react?" And the answer is simple. Because when fear takes over, you cease to exist. And when the whole world tells you that who you are needs healing, there comes a time when you believe it. Years later, I still dream of that dark room. I still smell the burning incense and hear the sound of prayers turning into screams. But today I understand that wasn't faith. It was control. It was abuse disguised as salvation. If you've come this far and understood the weight of this story, I want you to comment below. This is not a cure, it is cruelty. Because as long as the world continues to call faith what is torture, stories like mine will continue to be repeated, hidden, hushed up, in the name of a God who never asked for this. And what happened next was the beginning of my silent revenge, and the reunion with something I thought I had lost forever: love. I don't remember much about the road that night, only the rain beating against the windows and the sound of the old engine trying to stay afloat. I had nowhere to go, only that I knew I couldn't stay. The smell of incense still clung to my skin, and every breath I took it felt like the church was following me. Driving aimlessly is a way of escaping yourself, and that's what I did. I ended up stopping at a gas station in the middle of the road. I was soaked, shivering, and felt like the world had swallowed me whole. The attendant looked at me with pity and asked if I was okay. All I could say was, "I need a place to sleep." He pointed to a small hotel just behind, the kind of place that charges cheap and doesn't ask questions. I went in. The room had a narrow bed, a window with a torn curtain, and a mirror that reflected everything I no longer wanted to see. I tried to sleep, but my body still trembled. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pastor's face, Elijah's touch, the screams, the prayers, the darkness. I thought I'd escaped, but inside I was still trapped in that room. I got up, went to the mirror, and stared at myself for a while. Is this what they call sin? I thought. A tired man, with dark circles under his eyes, but still breathing. I pressed my hand against the glass and swore softly, "They'll never silence me again." The next day the sun appeared shyly. I grabbed the little money I had and went to a bakery. That's where I met Miguel. He was the kind of man who carried a light in his eyes even when he rarely smiled. He worked there, serving coffee and cheese bread to truck drivers, and when he saw me shivering, he brought me a blanket and said, "Sit down. Nobody asks you anything here before breakfast." That simple sentence dismantled me. No one had ever offered me warmth without wanting to fix me. We started talking. He had come from another city, also fleeing, but for a different reason. He had been thrown out of his home for who he was. His story was different, but the pain was the same. Miguel offered me shelter, a small room in the back of the bakery, where he slept. "It has a bed and a roof, that's all we can get for today," he said, and it was there that, for the first time in a long time, I slept without fear. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of rain and the sound of his breathing beside me. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep either?" I asked. "After everything we've been through, sleep is a luxury," he replied. We laughed, a light laugh but full of complicity. And in that moment I realized something was changing. I didn't feel guilty. I felt alive. The days passed, and we grew closer. In the mornings we worked together. At night we sat in the back drinking cold coffee and talking about the past. He told me he dreamed of opening his own place, a coffee shop where no one would have to hide who they were. I told him about the church, about Elijah, about the fear that still haunted me. He listened silently without interrupting, and when I finished, he simply said, "They tried to kill your love, but they couldn't. It's alive. It's here." It was that night that he kissed me. There was no rush, no fear. It was a calm kiss, full of care, but with a strength that made my heart truly beat again. I cried, not with sadness, but with relief, because for the first time, someone was touching me without trying to change me. He rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "God is here too, do you believe it?" And I believed it. In the days that followed, everything felt new. The smell of baking bread, the sound of rain, the warmth of the kitchen. Love returned to my body, guilt-free, but peace never lasts long for those with a past like mine. One afternoon, as we were closing the bakery cash register, a black car pulled up in front. Outside, a man in a dark suit got out. Elias. The same cold gaze, the same smile disguised as sanctity. My body froze. Miguel knew it instantly. "Who is that?" he asked. "Someone who should have stayed in hell," I replied. Elias walked in as if he owned the place. "Did you really think you could run away?" he said, his voice low and firm. "The church knows what you did. It knows where you are." I laughed, a nervous laugh. "What I did was survive." He stepped closer. "You didn't survive, you lost. And now you want to drag someone else down with you." He looked at Miguel, and his gaze held venom. Miguel took a step forward. "Get out of here before I make you swallow that Bible you used to hurt others." Elijah smiled. "Do you think love is a small sin? Hell is generous to those who feel too much." That was too much. I went for it. I grabbed him by the collar and pinned him against the wall. "You stole my faith, Elias, but you won't steal what's left of me." He remained silent. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. A fear that wasn't of God. It was of me. Michael held me back. "It's not worth it." Elias left, his face red and his suit wrinkled. "This isn't over," he said before leaving. But for me it was over. I looked at Miguel and realized that despite the fear, I was whole. That finally the past had stopped being a prison and had become a scar. That night we lay together. It wasn't just lust, it was healing. It was as if every touch said, "You're still here. You survived." Love, when it's true, is the most powerful prayer there is. Miguel fell asleep on my chest, and I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how the same God they saw me try to destroy now gave me someone to rebuild me. If you got this far, comment below. Love also heals. Because this phrase carries everything I have experienced: hell escape reunion, and the faith that is reborn when someone looks at you without fear. But stay with me, because what happened the next day when the past came knocking for the last time was what truly changed my life forever. The next morning, the sound of the rain had already given way to a hesitant sun, the kind of light that filters through the cracks in the window and makes the dust glisten as if time had stopped. I was still in bed, with Miguel sleeping beside me, his breathing calm, his body warm. I stared at him for a while, trying to understand how after so much chaos I had found a piece of peace. The smell of coffee coming from the kitchen mingled with his, and for a moment I wanted to believe nothing else existed outside. But life gives no rest to those who carry heavy stories. While he slept, my cell phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered without thinking. On the other end, a voice I knew well. Calm, controlled, and yet filled with venom. "I thought you had learned to obey, Samuel." It was Elias. His voice sounded different, as if he were trying to disguise himself as pity, but I already knew pity was the preferred mask of the cruel. "If you stay with this guy, everything you know about him will stop being a secret," he said. "Do you think Miguel is who he seems?" My whole body froze. "What are you talking about?" "Search his pockets, in his room. The truth often hides in simple places." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there for a few seconds, my phone trembling in my hand. I looked at Miguel, sleeping, and for a moment I thought it was paranoia, another one of Elias's traps. But something inside me wouldn't leave me alone. I got up and went to his closet. His clothes were few and carefully folded. At the bottom was a small, old, scratched metal box. I opened it. Inside was a photo of me, younger, on the day the church took me for that healing. My stomach churned. That photo couldn't exist. I'd never seen it before. And next to it, an envelope bearing the symbol of the same congregation where Elias was in charge. I took the paper with trembling hands. There was the church stamp and a note. Case 34, follow-up discontinued. Possible recurrence. In that instant, everything spun. I sat up in bed trying to understand. Miguel stirred, opened his eyes, and realized what I was holding. He went pale. "Did you go through my things?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why do you have this?" I retorted. "How did you get this photo? Why do you have a report on me?" He tried to come closer, but I backed away. "I can explain." "Then explain," I shouted. "Because now, I don't know if you saved me or if you were sent to finish what they started." Miguel took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face, and sat on the edge of the bed. "I worked for them, before I met you." The world seemed to fade away. "They recruited me years ago. I was young, homeless, and aimless. They promised me food and shelter, and told me I would have a purpose. They sent me to observe people like us, people they called lost causes. I found you by chance, but I couldn't follow orders. I fell in love with you." The confession came like a punch. "So all along you knew who I was?" I asked, my voice almost trailing off. "I knew what they said about you, but the man I met here, the one who laughs, the one who dreams, the one who cooks with me every morning, he has nothing to do with what they described." He stood up and walked toward me. "When I saw you that night walking into the bakery, broken, with the look of someone who had lost everything, I saw in you what I've always been, someone trying to heal from what the world calls wrong. I swore to myself I wouldn't let them touch you again." I wanted to believe, but doubt was an open wound. "And why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I knew you wouldn't listen, because I thought I could protect you if I kept quiet. But now they know where we are." A heavy silence fell. The distant sound of the street seemed louder than our voices. "Are they going to come after me, Miguel?" "No, they'll come after us." At that moment, someone knocked on the door. 3 dry, firm knocks. Miguel walked over to the window and looked out. "It's them," he murmured. My heart raced. The memory of the dark room, the prayers, the screams, it all came back. I couldn't go through that again. "We have to get out of here," he said. "Through the back door." We ran. The kitchen still smelled of fresh bread, and the morning sun filtered through the bars like prison lines. Miguel grabbed a backpack, threw in some clothes and the cash from the register. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Far enough so they won't find it. Close enough to start over." When we exited through the back, the black car was already parked out front. 2 men got out, wearing the same dark suits, with crucifixes hanging from their chests. I recognized the symbol. They were from the same sect Elias led, the Purity Restores. They believed they could cure what they called deviations using fear and guilt. We walked through the alley, the smell of garbage and rain mingling with each other. The sound of footsteps behind us grew louder. One of them shouted, "Michael, the Order wants you back." Miguel held my hand and said softly, "Run." We ran. Through narrow streets, around corners, without looking back. Our hearts beat louder than the sound of the cars. When we finally turned a corner and stopped, panting, he looked at me and said, "Now you know everything. But you have to decide. Stay with me, or go back to hiding." I looked at him and saw not just fear, but love. The kind of love that defies all hell. I took his hand. "I've lived imprisoned for too long. If I have to escape, let it be with you." He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "So now we're both fugitives, from the same God they said made us wrong." In that moment, I understood. The hell I feared wasn't eternal fire. It was the fear of loving freely. And for the first time, I chose sin. The sin of being happy. If you've made it this far, I want you to comment. I would choose love. Because perhaps deep down, the greatest courage there is this: to continue loving, even after being broken. But it doesn't go anywhere, because what happened on the road, when we thought we were free, was the moment when history truly became a dark miracle. The road seemed endless. The car chugged along, the sound of the engine mingling with our heavy breathing. Neither of us said a word. I stared out the window, watching the world pass by too quickly, as if trying to swallow up what we'd left behind. The smell of gasoline, the cold wind coming through the crack in the window, the sun beginning to rise on the horizon. It all felt like a movie, the kind you watch thinking it's a lie, but then once you live it, you discover it's worse than any script. Miguel drove with steady hands, but I could see the nervousness in the way he bit the corner of his mouth. Every now and then he glanced in the rearview mirror. "They won't follow us for long," he said, trying to calm me down. But I knew the look of someone who lies to protect. He knew they were still behind us. We stopped at an old gas station in the middle of nowhere. A dimly lit, blinking sign read, "Open 24/7. We got out, and the morning air was cold enough to hurt. I went into the gas station's store while he was filling up. I grabbed 2 bottles of water and a bag of cookies. When I looked at the counter, the attendant, a thin man with a curious look, looked at me and asked, "What are you guys running from?" He smiled without responding. Sometimes silence is the safest disguise. Back in the car, Miguel opened the bottle and took a long swig. "Let's go to the end of the road, then we'll take a trail. There's an old abandoned house there which I used once. No one will look there." I wanted to believe, but something was bothering me. "What about Elijah?" I asked. "Do you think he'll give up?" Miguel took a deep breath. "Elias won't give up. But now he has more to lose than we do. He won't expose what he's doing inside the church, but—" He hesitated. "He might send someone." The way he said "someone" chilled me to the core. We drove in silence. The car radio played an old song, the kind that seems to come from another time. I leaned my head against the window, and for a few minutes let the memories take me away. I remembered the day they put me in that room in the church, the dark room, with candles lit and voices shouting "Heal." I remembered the hands holding me, the prayers transformed into commands, the promises that I would leave there pure. And I also remembered the first time Miguel entered that same room. He was the pastor's assistant, the man who was supposed to help me free myself. Only instead of judging me, He looked at me with compassion. "You're not sick," he said back then, when no one was listening. "You just love differently, and that's not a sin." Those words were the beginning of it all. Suddenly the car jerked. "What was that?" I asked. "A tire blew out." Miguel pulled over to the shoulder. We got out and the hot air from the asphalt rose like a wave. He opened the trunk and started changing the tire, but I noticed something strange. A black car was parked a few meters away, on the other side of the road. The windows were tinted, the engine was off. "Miguel." "I saw it," he replied without looking up. "Pretend you didn't see it. Help me out here." I tried to remain calm. I held the flashlight, but my hands were shaking. The crickets seemed louder than they should have been. When we finished, we got into the car as quickly as possible. As soon as we started the engine, the black car started too. "Miguel, they're following us." "I know." He sped up. The chase began. The road was straight, long, and without curves. The sound of tires slicing the ground mingled with my heartbeat. The black car was approaching. "Hold on tight," he shouted, turning the steering wheel sharply to the right, turning onto a dirt road. The car behind hesitated, but followed us. Dust covered everything. Suddenly, Miguel braked. We ran out of the car and hid behind a fence. The other vehicle stopped a few meters ahead. A man got out, tall, dressed in dark clothes, with a crucifix hanging from his chest. "Samuel," he shouted, "do you really think you can run away from God?" I recognized that voice. It was one of the men from the church room years ago, the same one who had pushed me against the wall while praying out loud. Miguel took my hand. "We need to take the trail," he whispered. We ran without looking back. The sound of his footsteps came closer. Along with the words he shouted, "Do you think this is love? This is temptation." We ran until the brush was so thick that the light almost disappeared. The sound of branches breaking beneath our feet mixed with the distant echo of his voice. We stopped near a large rock. I was breathless. Miguel pressed his forehead against mine and said breathlessly, "We can't keep running forever." "So what do we do?" "Face it." It was there in that forgotten patch of forest that he kissed me. A quick kiss, but full of fear and desire. A kiss that felt like a silent oath. "If we're going to fall, let it be together." I closed my eyes and tasted earth, sweat, and freedom. The sound of snapping branches returned. The man was close. "They won't stop, Miguel." "No, but neither do we." Suddenly we heard a gunshot. The bullet flew past and hit the tree next to us. I threw myself to the ground, pulling Miguel with me. My heart felt like it was exploding in my chest. He cupped my face and whispered, "Trust me." He picked up a rock and threw it away, creating a noise on the other side. The man ran in that direction, thinking we were there. This was our chance. We ran in the opposite direction, crossing the brush until we found a shallow river. The banks were covered in leaves. Miguel took off his shirt, wet his face, and helped me cross. "The current will erase our tracks," he said. The water was icy, but it seemed to wash away everything, the fear, the anger, the past. On the other side, we found an old, nameless, almost hidden road. "What now?" I asked. "Now we hide until sunset. Then we go home, as I told you." We sat, wet, exhausted, but together. The sky was beginning to change color. I looked at him and asked, "Why are you still with me?" "I've been nothing but trouble." Miguel smiled wearily. "Because I was also healed, not by the church, but by you." Those words pierced me like light. For the first time in a long time, I felt that everything I'd experienced, the screams, the prayers, the fear, had led me to that moment of silence and truth. If you got here, comment, I would face it too. Because sometimes love isn't just touch and tenderness, it's courage. The courage to stay, to fight, and to not let anyone erase what your heart knows to be real. But it doesn't leave. Because when the sun set on that forgotten road, and we thought we finally had peace, fate decided to prove to us that hell wasn't over yet. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the world was filled with an eerie silence, the kind that precedes something big, unpredictable. Miguel and I were hiding inside the old house he'd mentioned. An abandoned mansion in the middle of the woods, with broken windows, the smell of damp wood, and the wind rushing through the cracks as if someone were whispering our names. The floor creaked with every step, and the moonlight filtered in streaks, illuminating the furniture covered in old sheets. "Is this where we're staying?" I asked, looking around. "For now," he replied, lighting a candle. The flame trembled as if it were afraid of the dark, too. We sat on the floor near the unlit fireplace. The wood crackled as if reminiscent of better times. Miguel looked at me seriously. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "I trust." He took a deep breath. "Then I need to tell you the truth, about why they were after us." The air seemed to freeze. I felt something big coming. "It's not just because we ran away from the church," he continued. "It's because what they did to you in that room, Samuel, wasn't just an attempt at healing. It was part of something bigger." My head throbbed. "Bigger how?" He looked at the candle flame. "That church has a group, a circle that meets at night. They say they heal, but what they do is destroy. They choose people like you, like me, to make an example of. Elias, the pastor. He records everything, the sessions, the screams, the cries. He sells the tapes to those who pay to see the victory of faith. Aviso, Samuel, roupas simples e gastas em tons neutros, camisa clara, calça escura, rosto delicado e expressivo, pele clara, cabelo castanho escuro, curto e desgrenhado, cerca de 25 anos. Miguel, roupas modestas e limpas de tons terrosos, avental de padaria, camisa bege, rosto sereno com olhar profundo, pele morena, cabelo preto ondulado, 30 anos. Elias, terno escuro impecável com gravata bordô, rosto anguloso e frio, olhar de autoridade. Pele clara, cabelo grisalho penteado para trás, cerca de 45 anos. Pastor, batina preta e colarinho branco, rosto redondo com olhos penetrantes e sorriso forçado. Pele clara, cabelo grisalho curto, por volta de 60 anos. Mãe de Samuel, vestidos florais e cardigã, rosto cansado, olhar piedoso, pele clara, cabelo castanho preso em coque, 50 anos. Mulher do vestido longo, vestido azul escuro até os pés, rosto severo e magro, pele pálida, cabelo ruivo preso com lenço, 40 anos. Rapaz do cântaro, roupa simples e bege, sem sapatos, rosto gentil, feições suaves, pele morena clara, cabelo castanho curto, cerca de 20 anos. Ex-congregado arrependido, roupas discretas, camisa social amassada, casaco cinza, rosto marcado por culpa e olheiras, pele clara, cabelo castanho grisalho, 40 anos. Homens de terno da seita, ternos pretos idênticos com crucifixos dourados, rostos impassíveis e sombrios, pele clara, cabelo curto escuro, entre 30 e 40 anos. Atendente do posto, donos da hospedaria, camisa xadrez e boné gasto, rosto simpático e curioso, pele bronzeada, cabelo loiro avermelhado, 35 anos. For a second I thought I had heard wrong. "Does he film?" I asked. Miguel nodded. "And when you disappeared for 3 days, remember? They said you were on a spiritual retreat, but you were locked away, recording hell without knowing it." My heart was pounding so hard. Everything made sense, the dark room, the voices, the hands holding me, the flashes of light. "And you knew that?" Miguel closed his eyes. "I was there from the beginning. I was part of the team until the day I saw you, when they brought you in, with your face bruised and yet calm. I couldn't go on. That was the day I decided to leave. That's when everything started between us." The silence grew heavy. I could feel the ground shaking beneath me. Anger was rising along with fear. "So, everything I experienced was a spectacle?" "Not for me," he said, touching my face. "For me it was the beginning of something real. I wanted to believe, but the memories came back, the smell of candles, the cold of the wall, the sound of voices praying as I cried." "And now?" I asked. "What do they want?" Miguel looked out the window where the moon illuminated the grass outside. "The evidence. I took one of the tapes. It's hidden." Before I could respond, a crack came from outside. A twig snapped. He blew out the candle with his fingers. "Shh." We stood in the dark, only the sound of the wind, then footsteps, 3, 4, 5, coming toward the house. The floor creaked near the door. "Miguel." He put his finger to my lips. "If we run, they'll find us. Stay still." Shadows fell on the wall. 2 people, maybe 3. I could see the glint of something metallic, a flashlight. The door creaked open slowly. Light swept the room. A man entered, wearing a dark suit, the same symbol on his chest that Elias wore. "They're here," said a voice. Miguel pulled me by the hand and we threw ourselves behind the sofa. The sound of boots echoed across the floor. "Search the basement," one of them shouted. Another replied, "What if they're together?" "Then burn it all." Fear turned to instinct. Miguel pulled me behind the kitchen, down a narrow hallway. There was a staircase leading to the basement. We descended. The air was damp and cold, a smell of rust and mildew. In the corner, a small window. "Can we get out that way?" I asked. "Maybe, but there's a fence." Upstairs, the sound of furniture being dragged, then the unmistakable sound of matches striking. They were really going to catch fire. "Is there another way out?" I asked, my heart racing. "There's a trapdoor, but it's stuck from the inside." He ran to a shelf, pushed aside boxes, and found an old gasoline can. "Let's use this to open the lock." "What?" "Trust." Miguel poured some gasoline over the padlock, then lit a piece of cloth with his lighter. The fire made the metal expand, and within seconds the lock broke. He pushed the lock hard. Wow! We climbed a wooden ladder, emerging behind the house. Flames were already beginning to engulf the roof. Smoke rose thickly. We ran toward the road. Behind us, shouts, "They escaped!" The fire lit the sky and the heat burned even the air. I stumbled, but Miguel caught me. "A little longer," he said. With every step, my body burned, not from heat, but from anger. "They'll pay for this," I muttered. "They will," he replied, "but we need the evidence first." We walked for hours until we reached a wooden cabin by a lake. "It's safe here," he said. I entered, and the sound of water lapping against the rocks brought a relief that seemed false. He lit another candle, looked at me, and smiled slightly. "Do you still believe me?" I took a deep breath. "After all this, I guess so." The tension turned to silence. Then, closeness. He pressed his face against mine, and the kiss came calmly, as if trying to erase fear with tenderness. It was a touch full of memories and desire, a mixture of guilt and redemption. The fire we'd left behind still burned now within us. Suddenly there was a crash outside. A twig? No. A metallic sound. Miguel got up quickly, blew out the candle, and went to the window. "There's someone out there." "What?" He looked at me seriously. They didn't give up. The candle still smoldered, leaving a smell of burnt wax. I could hear a car's engine approaching. Bright headlights cut through the darkness. "They've taken the trail again," he said. "But this time it's different. I won't run away anymore." And when he opened the drawer and took out the tape he mentioned, I understood that night wasn't over yet. If you got this far, comment, "The fire still burns," because there are wounds that burn not only the body, but the soul. And it is precisely this flame that will guide what comes next. Miguel held the tape as if it were a bomb about to explode. The reflection of the candle flame danced in his eyes, and I could tell there was more than fear there. There was an almost desperate urgency, as if that tape were the only thing capable of restoring meaning to his life. "What do you have in there?" I asked, my voice low, my body still trembling from the leak. He took a deep breath before answering. "Evidence. Everything. What they did to you, what they did to me, and to the others. It's all in here. But if this tape falls into the wrong hands, we disappear." The silence between us was heavy. Outside, the sound of the car stopping mingled with the sound of the lake water lapping against the rocks. "They're coming, aren't they?" I asked. Miguel looked out the window. "Yes. And now there's no escape." He put the tape inside his backpack, grabbed my hand, and said, "If they catch me, you run, understand?" But I wasn't going to leave him alone again. I already knew what it was like to be left behind, and the pain of losing someone is always slower than death. The sound of heavy footsteps approached. 3 shadows appeared outside. I recognized one of them, Pastor Elias. That man with the icy gaze who once placed his hand on my head and said God would rip the evil from within me. The same man who locked the doors and turned off the lights in the room where I nearly lost everything I had. He was there again, but this time, not with a Bible in his hand, but with something shining at his waist. Miguel moved quickly, blew out the candle, and pulled me to the corner of the cabin. "There's a passage behind the bed. It leads to the other side of the lake," he whispered. I shook my head. "If we have to run, we'll run together." He tried to insist, but there was no time. The door was kicked open. The sound of the wood breaking echoed like thunder. The first man entered. "I thought you had learned, Michael," Elijah said, his tone a mix of anger and pleasure. "But it seems sin still dominates you." Miguel stepped forward. "Sin is what you do, Elijah. Believing that pain heals, that faith is control. You don't save anyone. You only destroy." The pastor's gaze changed. He drew his gun and aimed. "Hand over the tape." "No." The world seemed to stop in that instant. I could see the sweat running down Miguel's face, the subtle tremor in Elias's hands. And then the impossible happened. One of the still-burning candles fell to the floor, and the flames spread across the carpet. Chaos began. Smoke filled the air, screams, running. I saw Miguel's silhouette pushing Elias, trying to stop him from shooting. A bang echoed, a gunshot. The dry sound pierced the air, and for a second, time froze. Miguel staggered back, his hand on his chest. Blood began to stain his shirt. I ran to him, desperate. "Miguel, no." He tried to smile. "Take the tape," he said weakly. "Don't let them erase what happened." I grabbed my backpack and looked at him, and even as my body weakened, there was still strength in his eyes. "Go, Samuel, now." But I couldn't get out. The fire was already spreading through the curtains and the walls. Elias was still standing, coughing, trying to find his way out. I saw the gun fall to the floor and, without thinking, kicked it away. I ran to help Miguel up, but the heat was unbearable. The ceiling began to creak. The smoke burned my eyes. He held my hand tightly. "Promise me you'll live. Promise me you'll tell me." I promised. Even if my voice broke, even if my chest hurt like never before, I promised. The roof collapsed in the corner of the cabin, and the sound of flames engulfing everything was the last sound before the world went white. When I woke, I was outside at the edge of the lake. The chill of dawn filled my entire body. Smoke rose behind me, and there was no sign of Miguel, only my backpack discarded beside me. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, the tape, burned at the edges but still intact. I touched it like someone holding a piece of my soul, and I realized this wasn't just a recording. It was the truth. Proof that hell has no horns or fire. Sometimes it wears a suit and speaks in the name of God. I stood up, feeling the cold biting into my skin, and began walking. Each step was a memory. Miguel's face, the touch of his hands, the smell of smoke mixed with the perfume that still lingered on my clothes. I didn't know where to go, only that I had to deliver that ribbon. And as the sun rose behind the mountains, I understood that love and faith should never be weapons. But in that moment, they were all I had to fight. Days later, I ended up in a small town. I stayed in a simple guest house where no one knew me. There, hidden in a room with thin walls and the smell of old wood, I decided to watch the tape. I grabbed an old VCR, inserted the recording, and pressed play. The screen hissed. Then images. The church hall, the crucifix in the background, people with their hands raised praying. Then the room, the same one where they'd locked me up. I saw myself there, thin, wounded, praying to a God who never answered. The camera shook. And behind it, Elijah's voice said, "Healing begins with suffering." The images continued, and I realized it wasn't just me. There were others, young faces, some crying, others with vacant stares. It was an archive of horrors, a catalogue of guilt. And amidst those tapes, Miguel's voice appeared. "This isn't healing, it's torture." I paused the video. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was trying to escape my body. I grabbed a pen and paper and started writing everything down. Names, faces, places. I knew what I needed to do, but first, I needed to be sure Elias was alive. The next day, I returned to the town where it all began. The church was still standing, and, to my surprise, full. Elias preached at the altar, his voice calm, the same fake smile as always. He spoke of love, redemption, and forgiveness, and the people believed him. They applauded. I stood in the back, watching. The man who had nearly destroyed me was now revered. My blood boiled, my hands sweated. And then something inside me decided this story wouldn't end in silence. But this, what happened that night, inside the church, in front of everyone, is what you'll understand from here on out. If you've listened to me so far, comment, "The flame did not go out," because what is about to happen will prove that the fire of truth is the only light that fear cannot extinguish. That night was too long. The rain beat down on the roof of the house, as if to remind me of the sound of prayers, shouts, and hurried footsteps inside that church. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pastor's face telling me that the demon of desire still lived within me. And the worst part is, for a while I believed it. I truly believed that loving another man was something that needed to be erased with pain. Until the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered without thinking. A low, hoarse voice simply said, "We need to talk. It's about what happened in there." For a second, my heart stopped. I recognized that voice. It belonged to one of the young men who prayed with me in the church basement. The only one who looked at me with fear, but also with something else. Something I could never quite name. We arranged to meet the next day at a small cafe downtown. The kind of place where no one pays attention to anyone else. When I arrived, he was already there. He had aged, but his gaze was the same, restless, deep, caught between guilt and desire. He apologized before I even sat down. He said he'd never forgotten what they did to me, that he heard my screams every time he closed his eyes. He told me that that night he tried to open the door to the room where they'd locked me but was stopped, that he'd been beaten for trying to help me. I remained silent. Inside, something stirred, something that wasn't anger. It was longing, not for him exactly, but for a time when I still believed that love could conquer fear. He told me that after leaving the church, he lived in hiding, trying to erase who he was. He married, had children, and became the man they expected him to be. But he said that sometimes he dreamed of the smell of burning incense, of my hands being bound, and he woke up sweating, as if he were still there. "They destroyed you," he said, his eyes welling up. I replied, "No, they just tried." The silence that followed was heavy, a silence full of things never said, full of kisses that stuck in my throat. We stayed there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. At one point he held my hand. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but my whole body reacted. It was as if his touch opened a door that had been locked for decades. I wanted to pull my hand back, but I couldn't. He said, "I still wonder if that was faith or cowardice." I replied, "It was fear, and fear is stronger than any prayer." He nodded. He looked around, made sure no one was watching, and asked me if I forgave him. I didn't know how to answer. Because forgiveness to me has always seemed like a fancy way of saying something terrible happened, and that you're going to pretend you've moved on. But in that moment, looking at him, I realized that maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without seeking revenge. When we got up to leave, he hugged me, and in that hug, I felt the same warmth I'd once tried to deny. It was strange. The same man who'd shared my pain now offered me comfort. And for a moment I let him, because the body, even wounded, still recognizes who marked it. He whispered in my ear, "You were the only one who didn't deserve that." And he left. I stood there watching him walk away down the wet street and thought about how life sometimes brings people back to us, not to start over, but to end right. In the days that followed, I began to remember everything more clearly. The voices, the songs, the promises. I remembered the smell of the wood in the room where they locked me, the cold sensation on my skin, the light that filtered through a crack in the window. I remembered the hands that held my face as they prayed loudly, asking to take the devil out of my body. I screamed, not because it hurt, but because I wanted someone to hear. And the only one who heard was him. Back then I hated him for not doing more. Now I understand that he too was a prisoner of faith, fear, and desire. A week later, I received a letter. The envelope had no return address, but the paper smelled like coffee. Inside, just one sentence. The cure they promised never existed, but perhaps redemption does. And next to the letter, a small wooden cross broken in half. I stared at it for hours. It wasn't a holy cross. It was a memory, a silent confession. That night, I slept for the first time without praying, and I dreamed. I dreamed of the room, of the sound of prayers, but this time there was light. In the middle of the dream, I heard a voice, calm, firm, saying, "You survived." I woke with tears in my eyes and a strange sense of peace. It was as if finally the echo of those screams had fallen silent. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come when we say, "I forgive you." It comes when the past stops hurting, and that morning, for the first time, it didn't. I opened the window, let the wind in, and thought that maybe God didn't live in those cold church walls, but in the simple act of staying alive after all. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, do you believe there's a cure for who we are? Or do you think love never needed healing? Write down below, faith doesn't erase love, because that's exactly what sums up everything I've learned. And that's where the story continues, because what I discovered after that letter was something even I wasn't prepared to hear. The morning after that letter, something in me felt different. I woke with a lighter feeling in the air, but also with a strange unease. I picked up the broken cross and turned it over in my hands, trying to understand what it meant. The wood still smelled of incense, the same scent as the room where it all happened. And then I realized someone had been there, someone who had kept it all these years and now wanted to remind me. I spent the entire day with my mind spinning. The letter said that perhaps there was redemption, but whose redemption? Mine or his? That afternoon I decided to go to the old church. I needed to see with my own eyes the place where it all began and ended. I walked slowly, like someone traversing the past step by step. The gate was rusty, and the faded sign said the same name, Church of Restoration. Restoration of what, I thought, because what I experienced inside didn't restore anything, it only destroyed. I pushed the gate open, and the creak echoed too loudly. The windows were dirty, covered in dust. I went in. The smell was the same, mildew, candles, and regret. The wooden pews were still in place. I walked to the altar and touched the white cloth. For a second, I felt a shiver. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slowly, and my heart nearly stopped. It was him, the same man who wrote me the letter. He was standing there watching me, the cross hanging around his neck. His hair was grey, his face tired. "You came," he said. I didn't know how to respond. I thought I needed to see for myself what faith has done to us. He gave a short, almost sad smile. We walked through the church together without saying much. Every corner seemed to scream memories I'd tried to erase. When we reached the basement, the door was locked, but he pulled a key from his pocket. "I never gave it back," he murmured. He turned the lock, and the sound of the iron opening seemed to awaken ghosts. The room was intact, the iron bed, the crucifix on the wall, the marks on the floor. I paused at the door, not daring to enter. "This," he said, "is where they promised to cure you, but what I saw was a man being torn apart." His voice trembled. "That night, I heard your screams and wanted to open that door, but they held me back. They said it was the devil testing my faith, and I believed out of fear." He ran his hand over his face and took a deep breath. "I've lived trapped in this regret ever since." I stared at him. There was something sincere, something pained. "Why did you come to me now?" I asked. He took a moment to answer. "Because I was healed too, but in a different way, and I thought you needed to know the truth about what happened here." Before I could ask, he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a photo. It was old, taken in the same basement. In it, I was kneeling, eyes closed, and beside me was him, holding my head while the pastor prayed. "They said it was the purification ritual," he continued. "But it wasn't just prayer, they filmed it. They sold the tapes as examples of salvation." My stomach churned. "Are you saying they used that to—" He nodded. "To prove the method worked. They said you were healed, but I saw it. You were destroyed. I felt the ground disappear. All the pain I thought I'd overcome came rushing back. And why only now? I asked. He looked up at the ceiling, as if seeking forgiveness. Because the pastor died, and before he died, he called me. He said he kept something that belonged to you. From his backpack, he pulled out a VHS tape with my name written in crooked letters. I brought it because I thought you should decide what to do with it. I stared at the tape, as if it were alive. Within it was the sound of my suffering, the image of my fear, and perhaps the face of who I was before everything. He asked me if I wanted to watch. I said yes. We turned on a small device he'd brought and inserted the tape. The screen hissed, and the sound of prayers filled the air. I saw myself there, younger, thinner, kneeling, crying. My hands clutching my head, my screams mixed with religious chants. It was like watching my own soul being burned. When the video ended, I didn't cry. I remained silent. He turned off the device and said, "Now you understand why I needed to find you, because no one deserves to bear alone the hell they invented for us." We left and walked to the back garden, where weeds grew between the rocks. The sun was already setting. He sat on the ground, breathing deeply. "I've dreamed so many times that you hated me," I replied. "You can't hate someone who is as weak as me." He looked at me, and in that look was something I hadn't seen in a long time, tenderness. "Do you still believe in God?" he asked. "I do," I said, "but not in the God who locks people away to teach them to love." For a moment we sat in silence, watching the sky change color. The wind blew through the leaves, making the same sound as distant prayers. He then placed his hand over mine. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I can try to stay now." I looked at him and realized there was no fear left, only an old weariness and a desire for peace. "Stay for what?" I asked. "So we can learn together what true healing is." His words lingered in my head the rest of the night. There was no more anger, no more guilt, just a constant echo. True healing. Maybe that was what I'd been searching for all along. Not a healing that erases who you are, but one that restores the right to exist without asking for forgiveness. If you've listened to me this far, comment below. True healing. Because that sums up everything that comes next. Because what happened when I decided to go back there one last time was something none of them, not those who prayed, not those who imprisoned me, could ever have imagined. That night the sky was overcast, and the wind beat hard against the windows as if the world itself wanted to participate in what was about to happen. I had returned to the church, alone, with the tape in my hands. The same tape that showed the moment they tried to erase me, and in a way the moment I was born again. Walking down that dark hallway was like stepping through time. Each step made the floor creak, and the memory of the past pulsed within me. There was no longer any fear, only one purpose, to finish what they started. When I reached the altar, I placed the ribbon on it. The unlit candles still held the scent of wax and prayer. I took a match from my pocket and lit them one by one until the room was illuminated by a flickering light. I looked up at the cracked ceiling and thought, if God is here, let him see who I really am now. I took out a lighter and aimed it at the ribbon. For a moment I hesitated. Those images were proof of everything they had done to me, but also the last link between me and the boy who once believed he could be healed. Then I let the fire touch the ribbon. The flames rose quickly, licking the plastic, and the smell of smoke spread through the church. Aviso Samuel. Roupas simples e gastas em tons neutros. Camisa clara, calça escura, rosto delicado e expressivo, pele clara, cabelo castanho escuro curto e desgrenhado, cerca de 25 anos. Miguel, roupas modestas e limpas de tons terrosos, avental de padaria, camisa bege, rosto sereno com olhar profundo, pele morena, cabelo preto ondulado, 30 anos. Elias, terno escuro impecável com gravata bordô, rosto anguloso e frio, olhar de autoridade. Pele clara, cabelo grisalho penteado para trás, cerca de 45 anos. Pastor, batina preta e colarinho branco, rosto redondo com olhos penetrantes e sorriso forçado. Pele clara, cabelo grisalho curto, por volta de 60 anos. Mãe de Samuel, vestidos florais e cardigã, rosto cansado, olhar piedoso, pele clara, cabelo castanho preso em coque, 50 anos. Mulher do vestido longo, vestido azul escuro até os pés, rosto severo e magro, pele pálida, cabelo ruivo preso com lenço, 40 anos. Rapaz do cântaro, roupa simples e bege, sem sapatos, rosto gentil, feições suaves, pele morena clara, cabelo castanho curto, cerca de 20 anos. Ex-congregado arrependido, roupas discretas, camisa social amassada, casaco cinza, rosto marcado por culpa e olheiras, pele clara, cabelo castanho grisalho, 40 anos. Homens de terno da seita, ternos pretos idênticos com crucifixos dourados, rostos impassíveis e sombrios, pele clara, cabelo curto escuro, entre 30 e 40 anos, atendente do posto, donos da hospedaria, camisa xadrez e boné gasto, rosto simpático e curioso, pele bronzeada, cabelo loiro avermelhado, 35 anos. It was at that moment that I heard footsteps. I turned and saw the man who had accompanied me on my previous visit, the same man who carried regret like a cross. He looked at me, startled. "What are you burning?" he asked. "My past," I replied. "And maybe yours too." He ran to me, trying to put out the fire, but I grabbed his arm. "Let it burn. They've had enough time to decide who we could be." He paused, taking a deep breath. Then, for the first time, he smiled. A calm, free, almost beautiful smile. The fire grew and began to illuminate the shattered stained-glass windows. Colors danced on the walls like memories being released. For a moment, the church seemed alive again, not with shouts or prayers, but with silence and truth. He approached me and said, "You know what I understood after all these years? That the hell they talked about so much isn't a place, it's fear. And today it's over." I stared at him. "Is it really over?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "because you came back." His words struck me deeply. I'd never thought going back could be an act of courage, but it was. This was the place where they'd tried to break me, and now it was where I was being remade. The fire began to rise through the altar curtains, and thick smoke filled the air. We grabbed an old bucket of water and threw it on the flames, but part of the altar was already black and charred. We stood there, looking at what was left. It wasn't destruction. It was liberation. I felt a lightness I'd never felt before. He then took a small yellowed sheet of paper from his pocket. "This letter is the last thing he wrote before he died," he said, referring to the pastor. "Want to hear it?" I nodded. He read softly, "If God exists, perhaps he understands now that faith without love is just violence in disguise, that no man can be cured of what he is. And if the boy in the dark room ever hears me, tell him I failed, that I tried to save my body and lost my soul." The words hung in the air, heavy and yet liberating. I looked at the dying fire and said, "Maybe he regretted it, but forgiveness doesn't change what was done." "No," he replied, "but it changes what comes next." We left the church together, and dawn greeted us with a cool breeze. The moon was high, and for a moment everything seemed too calm, as if the whole world had stopped to hear the sound of our footsteps. He looked at me and asked, "What now? Where are you going?" I replied, "Wherever life wants, but without carrying anything else." We walked to the gate, and there he took my arm. "Can I come with you for a bit?" I smiled. "You can, just don't ask me to go back to the past." He laughed lightly. "I promise not, but maybe I still want to meet you again." His words touched me, because for the first time in a long time someone didn't want to save me. They just wanted to walk with me. We walked to the road and sat on the curb. The silence was pleasant. After a while he took my hand slowly, as if asking permission. I let him. "When we were separated, I believed God had punished me," he said, "but maybe he was just saving us for the right moment." "And this is the right time?" I asked. He looked up at the sky. "I think so." In that moment I realized that love wasn't the problem. The problem was fear, the same fear they'd made out to be faith, and I hadn't felt fear in a long time. The cold breeze hit my face, but my body felt warm. It was as if the world had finally allowed me to breathe properly. Before we left, I looked at the church one more time. The flames had left the roof black and the altar destroyed, but somehow it seemed more beautiful than before. It was no longer a place of pain, it was a symbol. An open scar showing that healing is possible, yes, but only when we stop being ashamed of who we are. I took the broken cross from my pocket and placed it on the ground, right at the entrance. Now it belongs to who we were, and no longer to what they tried to make of us. He looked at it and nodded. We stood there for a while until the sun began to rise. The first ray of light hit us, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. A peace without guilt, without fear, without masks. He looked at me and said, "You're finally free," and I said, "No, we are." The road before us seemed endless, and maybe it was, but for the first time it didn't matter, because I wasn't going back. I was going forward. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way, and if it did, I want to make a request of you. Simple, but important. Subscribe to the channel now, because here we tell stories the world tried to silence, but that need to be heard. Stories of courage, love, and those who had to rebuild after being broken. Leave a like if this story touched you, because each like helps YouTube show this video to more people who also need to hear what you heard today. And comment below the sentence, "Faith does not cure what was never an illness," so I know you stayed until the end and understood the true meaning of this story. Oh, and before you leave, take a look at the video that's playing here on the screen. It's the perfect continuation of this conversation. Press and watch now, because the next story will give you even more chills.